Before we really fully get started, I was telling Jim Henry about this morning I went to Corinthians Baptist Church, where Pastor Fuzz, Enoch Fuzz, is the leader of that community, and he's also one of the leaders of our community. And he had a pretty packed house. Everybody sat carefully, but for an hour and a half, we engaged in conversations, everything from talking about kind of how the court system works to hearing a rendition of the I Have a Dream speech from Martin Luther King. It was really, really very impressive. So it was a kind of a good way to start the new year. He had tried to have it last week and it snowed. So Jim, I think the question for you before we get started is, did you get snowed in?
Well, we got snow a little bit when all Nashville got really snowed on. We came to the farm and expecting to have a big snow and didn't hardly have anything, just a kind of a dusting. And so we missed the snow, went north to Knoxville and upper East Tennessee. So we really hadn't had a lot of snow here.
Well, but are you in Nashville now, or are you someplace else today?
I'm at the farm in Kingston.
The farm. Okay, yeah. So hopefully that's a good sign for us. No, wait a minute, no. If the snow avoided you last time, could you come back to Nashville tonight? So we don't get the snow.
If the weather changes, I'll probably be back that way.
Okay, thank you. On the farm, did you, well, you didn't have any snow. The rest of us tried to go sledding, but you had to be pretty quick because then, it snowed really hard on obviously Thursday. It was a good day to go sledding. Friday, I saw kids trying to sled, and then the sun showed up and kind of melted the stuff on the street, so they could only go in the morning. So I'm not sure what's going to happen here this weekend. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
Well, we can get started. Welcome everybody again to 2022. We have been doing this program for almost 2 years. It's just amazing. We started right after the pandemic, and we're looking at what we're going to do for this year. Interesting things, but we thought we would start off with a major star, somebody who's been very, very important to the state of Tennessee and continues to be important in many different ways, and somebody with a very interesting history and can tell us interesting things about how he has moved through the system. So Jim Henry is our guest today. We have a couple of people on that I'll recognize. Chancellor Ann Martin is on the call today. General Paul Summers is on the call today, former Attorney General Paul Summers, and our Comptroller Jason Mumpower is on. So welcome everybody, and we'll recognize other people that get on. So Jim, I'm not even sure what's your official title. So you've been commissioner, you've been a state representative, you were the House. Were you the minority leader? Or were you the majority leader for a little while?
Republican leader.
Excuse me, the Republican leader. Okay, I couldn't remember exactly whether you'd ever gotten into the whole leadership, where you were in that position. You were commissioner at the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and you were also the commissioner at the Department of Children's Services. And that was under Governor Haslam, and then you moved into the deputy governor role. You have how long did you serve in the state house?
Served 12 years.
Okay. Well, okay, so let's go back before I get into all that. Why don't I go back and ask you the question that I ask all my guests, and that is, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? And how did you end up getting involved in the political world? And then I'll answer this question for you. I was going to say, why is it that people really like you? Because
I'm easy.
I hear from all kinds of people that they really, really respect you, and that's from both sides of the aisle, which is in this day and age is kind of unique. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born in Madisonville, Tennessee, moved to Kingston, and when I was 13 years old and grew up here and got involved in the service out of college. Went to Vietnam, spent 2.5 years in Europe, in Italy, and then came back and ran for city councilman, elected there, was mayor for 7 years, and then ran for the state representative, and lucky enough to come in at a time that we elected a lot of Republicans that year, about 15 of us, and we had a little caucus. And the next time I ran for leader and won. And then when I left the General Assembly, I went out and started a company called Omnivisions. And we serve people with disabilities and serve people that, had a lot of problems with homes and foster care. And so we had a foster care organization, pretty much. When Governor Haslam came in 2011, I think, he offered me to come and be Commissioner of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, the first commissioner. And a lot of us had fought so long to have that area become its own department that I just couldn't pass up the chance. So I came and was the Commissioner of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, put a very good team together, had a good team there, and put a very good team together and got accredited, got out of the lawsuits, and moved over to DCS, ran both departments for about 6 months, and came over there. We got them accredited, got out of the lawsuits. A lot of people involved in that, not just me, but a lot of people involved. We had a great team, and I never left one of those departments that didn't think it was in better shape with the people coming in. Debbie Payne took my position at DIDD, and then Bonnie Homrich took my position at Children's Services when I moved to the governor's office. And it was just a perfect way to step out. So then I went to governor's office, served there for the last administration of Governor Haslam, pretty much, and got out. And Senator Hagerty asked me to be his state director and put his team together. And so I told him how important I thought it was that he have people that was on the ground here that did things, because people really need help. And so we put together a great team. I intended to stay about a year. I stayed 11 months, I think, and retired in November. So I'm on my third retirement, and so far I'm doing fine. I miss the people that I was involved in and the people that I knew around state government more than anything.
Well, so go back for a minute to the city council, and you ran for mayor, and you would have been pretty young at that point, correct?
I think I was elected mayor when I was 26.
You're still very young, but you would have been very young at that point. So you became mayor at 26?
Yeah, I lost my mind. I don't know how in the world I thought I could handle several $1 million budget mayor at 26, but we did a pretty good job.
But you got elected at 26. That's amazing. When you came back from Vietnam, was politics kind of in your blood? Is that why you ran?
It was. My family was involved with the veterans and their comeback after the World War II. And I sat around the kitchen table and listened to them talk about getting people out and getting them to vote. And they all ran with their uniforms on. I remember that. And, in East Tennessee around Madisonville and Athens, there was the famous Battle of Athens where, people absolutely rose up because there was such a machine there. They rose up and assured that they had, a proper election and elected a whole group of veterans. My dad wasn't one of those, but he was part of doing it. And I listened to that. He went to work in the courthouse. I listened to it. He was one of the key people for President Eisenhower. And he went to work for Department of Agriculture. I'm kin to Senator Henry, that not the one that was with us, but probably some kin to him. But there was a Speaker of the Speaker of the Senate. It was Senator Henry from Blount County. I was some kin to the Supreme Court, General Henry. And I've got a lot of connections with politics. So yeah, it was in my blood.
So tell me, and we're going to get into some of the stuff with DEADS and DCS in a minute. And then at the end, I'd like to talk to you about kind of how you look at the world in general. But go back and tell me a little bit about serving in the state house. And I know that I'm trying, at least on this show, we try to, it's more of a discussion. It's not really let's put blame on anything or talk about anything that's more derogatory, but there seems to be a difference between the way you look at Congress, but you can also look at the state house about how people kind of work together. There seemed to be a much easier way, or at least an effort for groups to work together and have a better form of communication between people on opposite sides of the party. I don't know. I've been up there for some time. I'm not up there this year. I don't know if it's gotten any better, but the word is that it's more difficult. Tell us a little bit about the time when you got into legislature and what it was like.
I think, that what was different was that we communicated more. We went to receptions that they don't do anymore much. We rode back and forth for various reasons. We stayed here all week. It was I've always kind of rationalized as it being kind of like going back to college, especially at my age, and except it was extended. And, I had a state senator, there's a Democrat, a state senator, there's a Republican. I had a state representative that was a Democrat, one is Republican. We all represented parts of Roane County. It was divided into about 4 districts at that time. And it was different in the fact that it's very difficult to go out and break bread with someone and then get up and attack them on the county, on the floor of the House the next day. You get to know people at a different level. I don't think we do much of that anymore. It's hard for me to judge anything because you've got to be in that setting to judge. But we were more into improving education, building safer neighborhoods, bringing economic development in, instead of these constitutional questions that so divide our population and aren't very good accepting the fact that they end up in lawsuits. Some judge hands down an order and then we move forward. So I think that the times were different then as far as people working together. When I went there, Jimmy Nafee and I traveled the state. We visited every single agency that had disabilities provider, everyone. We sat down with all the parents. We sat down with all the staff. We visited all the people that were in the agency. At that time, the counties were involved because the state was less involved with that, and the counties were involved. And so you had county participation. And kind of when the funding left, sometimes the county leaves too. But it's just a different time. I mean, it's everywhere. It's in Congress too. But I tell you, if you get to looking at why you want to keep education as our number one goal because it leads people places, if you take a look at what brings jobs in, and if you're doing that, there's really no good. I mean, it sounds good, but every time you bring an industry in, it's either not paying high enough or not enough jobs. And on the other hand, it takes employees away from other ones. So all those things are controversial, but keeping safe neighborhoods was a huge issue in those days. And a lot of the laws were passed, and that Class X felonies where if you did something, you had to serve this many years. And we needed that in order to stop what was happening. And I'm not sure that we're going in the other direction now. And I don't know how, I don't know whether that's a financial thing or one that we really need to be doing.
Well, eventually I'll come back to the question about, do you see any ways to bring people back together? I will tell you in this, so I worked for Jimmy Nafee when he was Speaker of the House. And, there would be fighting on the floor, But particularly as working for the speaker and watching the speaker, he had really good relationships with people on both sides of the aisle. It was a different time in terms of what would happen, after session. They would go out to dinner, and it would be combinations of people. I remember that. I remember, having really good relationships with the House Republicans and the House Democrats. And people just seemed to somehow, even when could be tension on the floor, it was just kind of understood that was kind of what had to happen. But in the end, people would work together. And what I've heard is that people don't go to dinner anymore. They don't have that type of bonding type of situation. And even with the Metro Council, we don't, it used to be we would go out to dinner after the council meetings, and we don't do that anymore. Part of it was because of the pandemic, and it shows. In many ways, it shows. So I don't know. I don't know where that goes. It's just, it's somehow we have to get people working back together to get stuff done.
Very difficult during this COVID time.
Yeah.
And get people to go out because, you're nervous about being out, and you're nervous about who you're. I mean, this is not this is a life and death. I mean, the new COVID is less maybe toxic, but I'm telling you, to some people it's not. It's just as tough as the first one. And I've had friends that have died. I mean, Governor Alexander's son. Can you imagine? 52 years old, and Drew Alexander died, and that's just terrible.
Yeah, and
makes you nervous about having those kind of things again. And I think if you ever needed a time, you need it.
Well, let me ask you this. So have you seen the movie Don't Look Up?
Yes.
Okay. So I thought it was very cleverly done, and without, it shows, I think it was trying to show kind of the absurdity on both levels, both sides of different on the same issue, when it's right in front of you. And one of the things and I ask you this question. If you go back to 9/11, there was a mood in this country of coming together. Something had caused us all to work together. Didn't last long. But what I would have thought COVID would have done the same thing. I would have thought COVID, and something that was invisible, that was attacking everyone, would bring us back together, but it didn't.
Well, it seemed like that was kind of a personal thing against President Trump. To me, anything that it appeared like might help him, people made a point to try to criticize, and it put us on two sides almost immediately. And I don't know, these are very difficult times, and I hope that we're over those times as far as moving forward. But I just don't know. The issues seem to me a lot more complex. There's no easy answers to them. It's easy for all of us to get together and decide we want to build a better school, or we want to do better with the curriculum that we're offering our children. But it's harder to get in and say whether somebody's producing the right number of COVID vaccinations or something else. And it's easy to criticize if you're looking at that. But you don't need, I always remember something that stood out very rationally with me in my early years in politics. Howard Baker said something that always stuck with me. Don't get too mad at the guy sitting across the table at you. He might be right. And, there's a lot of truth to that. And there's always two valid reasons that and they're usually a good argument if you can hear the argument. But there was a few things that divided us, and we stood our ground on it. But we never, we had a kind of a understanding that we wouldn't surprise each other. If I was going to make a long-winded debate against a certain bill, the leadership of the Democrats knew it. And they didn't know what I was going to do, but they knew I was going to oppose it. And that's as, as Republican leader. But more than anything, I was the governor's spokesman on the floor, and I needed to get things done. I didn't need to cause division. So I tried to accommodate when I could, tried to work with Jimmy and Governor McWhorter, and even Jim McKinney and I sometimes had things that we could do together. One of the funniest things that ever happened to me was when I came there, they put me on the on a committee that is fiscal review, and we got in committee where they changed the rules to where I could do that. They hadn't been a Republican on it, and so they changed the rules where I could do that. And when I got in there, Jim McKinney just got up and raised Cain about it and said, Jim Henry's trying to take over the General Assembly. Well, Governor McWhorter had made the offer. And I mean, we had one member on fiscal review. So I mean, it wasn't like we were trying to take over, but what he was trying to do was get that voice in there where we could at least propose something. And one thing I liked about all that time is that, when you propose something, it wasn't an idea of killing it, it was improving it if it was a good idea. So you put an education bill out there, we improved on it. If we were against it, we offered improvements. If you put a road program out there, then we improved it. We didn't try to kill it just for the lack of being against it. And so, that was kind of the attitude. And, just like in intellectual and developmental disabilities, I mean, we were all together on that. I mean, all of us together. I mean, every governor's been for that. But, quite frankly, you're never going to see people of this state get so upset that they walk out the door, walk to the Capitol, demand better treatment for people with disabilities. There's just not that many involved. And so, they want to get mad over other things, but not what government really ought to be all about, which is taking care of people that can't take care of themselves.
Well, talk to me more about your role with intellectual and developmental disabilities. You've obviously been involved in that area for a long time, both legislative and in your professional life. And then you became the commissioner. Tell us, I guess the things that you saw improvements on. There were questions that came in over the week about still waiting list and, what happens particularly as with modern medicine. We had the same thing when I was at the Commission on Aging. More and more people living longer, which is great. But with individuals, I think it used to be that people would say, well, parents would take care of their kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities and take care of them. But the kids are now outliving the parents, and there are, situations and ramifications with that. Tell me about what you saw in your role and what you continue to see.
Well, when I first came to the General Assembly, I spent a lot of time talking to people that I thought were leaders in the Senate and the House. One of the things that guy told me was Ed Blank, and I don't know if you remember him, Senator Ed Blank down in West Tennessee. And Ed told me, he said, you ought to become an expert in something. Well, I had been involved with intellectual developmental disabilities here in Kingston at the Michael Dunn Center. And then I had a son come along about the time I went to the General Assembly. And so I thought, well, maybe the best thing I can do is concentrate on that. You can argue and have issues, but let's have one go-to person in the General Assembly that really knows more than anybody else. So I tried to do that. And there was lots of people came, with me on that. And we made a lot of difference. I mean, I remember a time in this state when we paid providers across the state different. I mean, and you wondered, well, is this political? I mean, why should a level 2 child get, or a child with the same disabilities get less in one part of the state than another? So that was one of the things that Speaker Nafia and I went across the state to do. And after that, we didn't even have to pass a law or anything. They just did it from the governor's office. I think that Uh, Governor McWhirter was a governor at that time. And they just did it right out of the governor's office. They equalized all the rates. And when they established the department after all those years, and I had been gone for a while from the General Assembly. And, I remember Bernie Durham talking to me about how that kind of got done at the last minute. That was a legislative initiative, and it was a great one. And, I just tickled to death because I'd been trying to do it all my life and hadn't been able to do it. And then when I was gone, they got it done, and Governor Haslam came in and offered me that to be the first commissioner. So it was an easy choice for me.
Sure.
But those are things that, people are never going to be satisfied with that. But I mean, just like us, I was making pretty good money when my son came along, but we spent everything. I mean, I don't know what people do that have less resources than we did. My wife dedicated her life to him, and it changes everything in your family and everybody around it. And we have a big picture of him in a crown and scepter, and my daughter made it of him one time, and he's got a crown scepter and all that stuff. And the story is that we came in and gave the king everything we had, and that's the way it was. But some people can't do that, and then you get into tremendous cost for these kids. And there's two sides of it. You don't do that anymore, but in those days you took care of the most, the person with the most problems,
right?
And you took care of whatever their needs were. Well, I was trying to spread the money as far as I could across the state. And I had a couple from Memphis that came to see me about, we had made some changes in services for their child. And I said, ma'am, do you realize that the state is paying almost $450,000 to take care of your child? And, there's got to be some places that we can spread this money thin. And he looked at me and said, Commissioner, I really don't give a damn. And, when it comes to that child, they're going to do whatever they can. But he had multiple problems. But, some of these kids do. Now, there's been some criticism of the new programs that the ICF program where, there's the waiting list is larger, but they've increased the number of people that you take into the system. And I think if we give it a chance, it might work really well. But there's still a lot of people on the waiting list, and they don't understand why. And the reason, it's a dollar thing. I mean, it's, I always get nervous out of Washington when somebody comes up with a new philosophy on how to take care of something, because usually it's all around the money, and it's not around the quality. So I always am concerned about oversight and how we pay attention to how these people spend the money that are getting services. And it's just a great thing. I tell you, Tennessee is probably still is as much criticism, and there is still a leader. I mean, we had people moving here to get the services. We got accredited, first department in the country that got accredited, got the national award one time. So it's, it's a great time. And I think that the heart's still there. This governor has the heart to do something. I noticed he just had made some improvements that I don't know whether he's announced yet, but I'm not going to announce them for him. I've done that before.
I try not to answer for the mayor ever.
Yeah.
So I was looking at some of the questions. That's what I'm doing. So a lot of work has been put into this, but like you said, I love the story about the lady who came and talked to you about the $400,000, because it's very personal to people. And so the question is, we can always do more. There are waiting lists. I think there's always been that concern about how quickly you can move on if you have to get onto TennCare, waiting lists and things like that, programs, everything else. there always is that consideration of resources. I guess, where can we, are there specific areas that you know of that, we're all working on to actually move it along faster? Because there's so many, this is so personal to so many people.
It really is. I think that really we're doing everything we can do as far as I understand it. I left the department 5 years ago, I guess, and 5 or 6 years ago. And there's, like I say, never enough money, but I think that trying to do the most, and that's an $800 million budget when I was there. 4,200 employees that we started out with, and we don't have those. We had, we had 3 lawsuits that were costing hundreds of millions of dollars that now is directed towards the care of those people. And I think we've just got to be diligent in the fact that the leadership is involved in this. This is a leadership thing. It's not one that people are going to necessarily grasp unless they have an interest in it. So you've got to have somebody in the leadership that takes a part in it. And I can tell you, Bill Purcell, Jimmy, Governor McWhirter, Lamar Alexander, Bredesen, all those guys, Sundquist, all of them, Governor Lee, they all take a personal interest in this to see that the best resources we can. I went into the department, and the first time I walked in there, I had to let 9 members of my staff go. And, everybody talking about improving services, but how in the world do you do that? We face that almost every year. And so we tried to do more with less, but you can only do that for a certain length of time. And right now we're lucky to have some money, but is it recurring? I don't know. Is it going to be here next year? I don't know. You might go back to the time when the governor presented, which happened for about 10 years. Every time the governor would present a budget, they asked for cuts. And quite frankly, about the only way you can judiciously make those is if you keep spending the same, you're making cuts, because the increased price of finding employees, retirements. Another thing, that people don't realize is just our retirement system, how much those things are costing. I know I've got a little bit of knowledge of Nashville and how it's struggling with its retirement program. And, Tennessee's they're pretty lucky, but, if we were getting 7% on a member's retirement, if that's what they were earning 15 years ago, they're not getting anything now, or not keeping up with inflation. So what happens to that in between unless you cut the program? And you can't do that. People have worked their life trying to get a retirement. So that's an expensive thing that you're keeping the same, yet it's costing you more money. So it's a huge obligation. The state puts in, I think, $150 million the last year I was there, trying to keep the retirement solvent. And we've done it. But we've been lucky in a lot of ways. That good leadership at all these positions, and Tennesseans have been, paying their share. I like sales tax, quite frankly, because I think everybody pays it. If you're buying more, you pay more. If you're an illegal person in our state, you're paying it. You don't get by. And I like a lot of it because about 32% of the gas tax is paid for by people traveling through the state. And that's also a great source of revenue for the rest of the state of Tennessee. With its, it's become the place. Everywhere I go, Nashville, Tennessee. You from Nashville? Yeah. And used to, when you went, they'd say, you from Nashville? You could. It's kind of like asking somebody how old they are. They can ask it 2 different ways. How old are you? Or how old are you? It's you can tell how they feel about it. And right now, I think Nashville is in line to get a couple of big conventions next year.
Could be. We got more and more people coming here all the time. Let me switch over for a minute. So you were asked by Governor Haslam to also deal with DCS. I think I remember that day. I think I had I think either I came down and saw you in your office or something. And it's like, if you need some help, just let us know. First of all, that's a tremendous compliment to be asked to run two departments. I know that you were having to try to deal with both, but tell me a little bit about your service at DCS and the same type of thing in terms of, what that's so difficult. And so many more people involved. And so what was it like?
It was great. I had a dream team there. I mean, I had Scott Modell. I had who now is a consultant for people that, are trying to do things better. And we had Debbie Miller, we had Bonnie Homrich, we had a group that really was on top of the game. And I think they'd been beat up a little bit. And it was easy. I wanted to invite the media in to let them show just what a difficult job it was. So they got out and followed me around. And I was advised at that time not to do that, that you'll end up making it negative. But I think it was the thing that really opened the door for us with the media, was to get them to go out and see what we were really facing. And I never will forget the time that they followed us over to within a mile or two of the Capitol. And we went over and knocked on the door. And of course, lady came to the door, and we had to wait till, 10 or 11 o'clock, because you didn't go there after 4 o'clock because the danger's involved. So we waited that long. She came to the door in a house coat, and really bothered us to see somebody in a house coat. And she's got 2 kids, and one of them's never gotten out of bed. And I went upstairs while they were interviewing her to look at and saw the kid laying there, not any no blanket or anything on. And went back downstairs and looked at the kitchen. It was devastating. I mean, it was all pizza, frozen pizza, that had been cooked and left in the refrigerator. I mean, there were plenty of canned goods. But, and we went out and, started looking around, and another couple came out that was living there. And they weren't supposed to be living there. And the media is right here. They're watching this. And so I sat down, and we were interviewing the lady, the mother, and they handed me the baby to take. And so I was rocking the baby, trying to be nice. And we the baby and I caught eyes. We kind of stared at each other. And I just thought that, if it wasn't for us, the government, the DCS, the thing people hate, this baby wouldn't have a chance. And so it kind of brought the real points that we wanted to bring around, and things changed for us. We were open no matter if we took criticism, because, it was, nobody did that work unless they were resigned to try to help. I mean, you don't do that work for the money. I mean, you can get a master's degree in that and go to work for $29,000. I mean, not many entities that will pay 29. I mean, it's a lot more than that. And it's just tireless. You don't leave it at 4:30. You're dealing with it at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, but it's great work. And we worked hard, got them accredited, got out of the lawsuits, flew to Washington. And I always remember taking the staff to Washington. I wanted them to receive this award, not just me, because they had been the one that did it. So we loaded the plane with staff. And before I did, I went up and asked Greg Adams if I could do that. And he said, well, there's a lot of criticism of flying around the state. And he said, we're probably going to really catch it on this. But he said, go ahead. So we went ahead and flew everybody up there. They felt part of it. We got the award in front of Congress, which is interesting to go from probably the worst, thought of organization to the best in just a couple of years. But it was great part of my life, and I'll never forget those two departments.
Let me let me ask you, give me two questions. The problems, and it's not just Tennessee, but the problems everywhere. I mean, you're talking about a very personal situation with the family and the baby that you held. It's everywhere. You're talking about one situation, and the problem is massive. So how do you keep in perspective to try to figure out? And maybe this is for the staff. You take care of one family, here comes another 5 that come in the door. You're trying to keep up. It's very difficult. How do you keep people understanding that we have to keep going, we have to keep trying, and that even though the problem may be immense, one family at a time, and that we can help?
I think that's the only thing you can do. Quite frankly, is our society is breeding this, and the drugs, the poverty. I mean, this is a poverty issue. And, they are, if you go to Memphis, inner city Memphis, and go to Appalachia, the same problems exist. It's not anything, it's got to do with drugs. It's got to do with alcoholism. It's got to do with kids having kids, and you're trying to save them. I mean, one of the most interesting places that you'll ever go is Anderson County in Oak Ridge. And in one side of that county is the city of Oak Ridge, which has more doctorate degrees than anywhere concentrated in the world. On the other side of that county is the most poverty-stricken Appalachian area that you've ever seen, within 30 minutes drive across the county. So it's a very difficult situation, and it's got to, we can do the best we can, but you don't have enough resources or right now to take care of the problem, let alone try to get into what the issues are. And, the issues are always education, and trying to educate people, trying to build the right kind of values that people have. I feel very lucky. I was born in a town that had about 1,800 people. And, in that 1,800 people, my aunt was a school teacher. My other aunt ran the dime store. My grandmother on both sides was there. It takes a village. And every time little Jimmy stepped out of line, there was somebody there to say, hey, guy, you can't do that. And that's not the world that most of our children grow up in today. And if you go to some places in this state, you will see that people that are 5 to 7 years old don't know the concept of 3 meals a day. They don't have a clue about what that is. So, we've got just a ton of problems, and it's very difficult to get to all of them when you can't handle the problems you're having, and you've got problems with the members there. I mean, just like the waiting list, it's larger than it's ever been, but the roles are larger than they've ever been. So, it just keeps, those things keep growing. And we recognize so many problems that other societies and other countries just ignore. I mean, go to China, for instance, and see what happens to a kid with disabilities. I mean, they get lined up, they take them out to the street, some bus picks them up, and they never see them again. And, what happens to them? You hear things about, they keep them for a year and then they're gone. And, we don't do that. And we take this is a great country. And if you don't want to know, I'll tell you the time I spent in the military in Vietnam, and close to Mongolia and some of those places that I traveled. I mean, you see people starving to death, yet here we're arguing over why that there's not 10 McDonald's open. It's closed down because nobody is working there. If you go to Europe, you know, you think of Europe being so, oh, it's great. I mean, everything's good there. When I went there, it was kind of like going back to the 30s. I mean, rich people owned property, poor people didn't own anything. They all wore the same black clothing. You know, it was destitute, and I'm sure it's much better today. But that was in the 80s. So I mean, it was. This is a great country, and I tell you that military experience that Jack Kennedy had with sending people over to try to take care of people, the military experience you have is just. When I came back here from serving 2.5 years in Europe and a year in Vietnam, I was ready to go.
It's interesting because I think, you know, people's life's experience do help you in terms of your, obviously we're a product of our environments and what we're taught when we grow up and what we experience as we go through. Let me ask you one more question, and then the last few minutes we'll talk about overall some stuff in the country. So the question is, you know, you talk about other countries and you talk about what we do, and obviously there's efforts to address issues, whether it's with dealing or helping people with who are dealing with intellectual and developmental disabilities or children. And it's, you know, it's not enough. And I know it's a resource question, but I guess the question would be, are there other ways to kind of up our involvement, other things that you can think of where we're doing this and there's a lot of effort and so forth, but can we raise that level of commitment?
I think you can. I think it's got to be done local level. I don't know how much of it you can do at the state level other than bring a resignation, you know, be resigned to the fact that the state and federal government can't do everything, but this is something that I think people need to get involved in. You know, just take myself, for instance, you know, I ought to be worth more now to those kind of organizations than I've ever been in my life. So instead of riding off into the sunset, like we did 150 years ago, and you've given me 500 or 600 acres of land somewhere out west, you know, I'd rather be involved in trying to help people with disabilities or children try to get on the right track. That'll actually do more for our country. But, you know, I think there's lots of opportunities, but I think we've got to incentivize that at the local level. I think, you know, talking about it in Washington, yes, there's great things that can be done. Yes, there's lots of resources there, but this isn't all about money. It's about people's involvement. And the more of those organizations you get started and are supported at the local level, the better off those people will be that have disabilities.
I may want to talk to you more about that off camera, because I think you may be right. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left, a little less than that. So tell me, it's quieter now than it has been in the last several years nationally, even though when I talk about quieter, I'm talking about people, you know, watching every day on television, everybody fighting, but it's still on there. I mean, I turn on the news in the morning and yep, people fighting within parties themselves, people fighting among the party lines, this inability to communicate, or maybe not the inability to communicate, but we don't want to communicate. We're not going to talk to each other, and we're just going to block things. You've been involved in this in government and politics for a long time. How do we get back to, so we're not at a stalemate all the time? How do we get back to where we can discuss and we can work through this? And you know, I mean, if you could design some way where we could have that breakthrough, what would you say?
I'd like to see our leaders get back out into the communities, talk, have the public meetings, discuss, listen. You know, we used to do that before we decided who the candidates are. Today, we listen to a few ads on television and read something over the internet and make that decision on, who our next leaders are going to be. I think it'd be great if we limited somehow the amount of money that we spent on these campaigns and drove these candidates back to the courthouses to where they could go into communities and talk to people, and you'd have some realization of who you were electing before, you just listen to some wild TV ad or let that influence you. But, we're living in a cell phone, iPad, computer society. And I don't know, that's my way of doing it. I'm sure there's lots of other ways, but you can't see a lot of people. But there's lots of ways out of this if we'll all come together. I mean, there's lots of ideas out there, and they're good ones. I don't really necessarily care whose side it's on or what party it comes from. Let's just get back to where we're talking to each other and solving problems and the real issues that damage this country. I mean, it's got so much to offer to so many people, but the government isn't the answer to all of it.
Well, and so I'm sitting here listening to it and go, how do you do it? I mean, from a local perspective, we've got similar problems, where people won't talk to each other or won't listen or don't ignore, they ignore the basic facts of a situation, and it's easier to ignore and then express your own opinion. So it's like, I ask you if you saw Don't Look Up. It's like, don't, how do you get people to start re-engaging in listening to the other side? And I'm thinking that, from a city council standpoint, maybe, having dinners after council meetings, as long as it's not 3 o'clock in the morning, is a good idea. Once COVID is kind of allows it, at least you got that conversation started.
Yeah. We used to have coffee after the council meetings. We didn't have time to have dinner, but we'd go out and have coffee after the meetings, and we'd talk about the discussions. The problem with that is now the being public with everything, is very difficult to talk about issues, and I'm all for public disclosure. But sometimes city councilmen need to talk to each other without having somebody putting it on the front page of the paper the next day. And I mean, that solves problems. I mean, making an issue is out of something that your community needs. How do you do that from a public forum? I mean, I don't know how to do that. I mean, it takes a lot of committee work and a lot of sweat and hassle before you can get there. I tell you, if I was starting over in politics, I would play my whole game around going out and seeing people. If it wasn't for visiting jobs, it would be going to community events. And I'm not talking about organized things. I'm talking about drop-bys. It's amazing how much people appreciate that, and it's amazing how that when you get it, they get a chance to say something to you, they don't. But at least they've had that chance, and I think they feel better about it. And it's we're at a very difficult place in this country, and I just wish we could all come together and get back on the main tracks of things that are really important instead of trying to redesign the Constitution, things like that.
I think maybe I'm a product of that old school. I learned quite a bit from watching the legislature, working for, Speaker Nafee. So in my role, I do like to go out. Obviously, it's harder these days with the pandemic and you're careful, but I do like to go talk to people. And, one of the tricks I learned, I don't know where I learned this, was, you walk into a big room where you don't know a lot of people, and it's some, everybody's sitting there eating barbecue or something. And you go like, okay, I'm going to work this room. And so it's a challenge in many ways, but you find a table to start with, and then you start working, and then you get more comfortable with it, and you're on your way. But you learn so much because people, a lot of times they won't tell you what's on their mind, but some of them do. And it's a good way of kind of knowing what people are worried about at the time. I wish we could get back to more of that. Or maybe we will.
I think we will eventually. I think when people have a chance to express themselves, even they have a chance, they might be a little bit more tame the next time they meet. And there's a lot of good ideas out there. But, you know, there's a lot right about what we do, and it's natural to concentrate on what's wrong. But man, when you go over the things that we're doing right in this country, it's unbelievable. I mean, the things that have happened to Tennessee, we've had a great run here in public officials, and it's unbelievable the leadership we've had since I got here, with Alexander, McWhirter, Sundquist, and Phil Bredesen, and Governor Haslam. I worked closely with Haslam and Alexander than I did any of it, and they never had a thought of doing anything except what the right thing. And I think Governor Haslam put that in his book, try to make up your mind on what the best thing was to do. And it's pretty difficult to argue with somebody when they're always going after that issue of trying to do the right thing. And so, for everybody. But we've been very lucky here with Governor Lee's, I think, is a great Christian man. I enjoy working with him, but we've just been lucky in Tennessee. And of course, it's the government is a product of it. I mean, we've got probably the best financial situation we've ever had in the state.
Well, so we've got like 1 minute left. Now that you're retired for the third time, you interested in running for the city council?
I was thinking about starting over again, but I was going to start at the mayor level.
You're gonna go right for the mayor position.
No, Lamar Alexander told me something after he left the Senate that I kind of liked. He said, "I've turned the page on politics, and I want to do things now. I want to do public works. I want to get back involved in some activities," and I have. So I'm through running for office.
All right. Well, what I do want to say is how much I appreciate all the things that you've done.
Well, you and I have a lot together over the years, and I appreciate the relationship we've had.
Well, I think you've done tremendous work. But what I will end by saying is that I don't want you to stop. And I knowing you, I don't think you will. But there is a level of understanding. You have a background, you have experience, and you do things for the right reason, and you're trying to help us all get to a solution to many of the issues we face, and I appreciate that. Okay.
Thank you very much. It means a lot coming from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the time. Everybody, thank you. We're on next week. We'll be back here at the same time. I hope everybody has a safe weekend. We'll see what happens with the snow. Everybody be safe. All right. Thanks, Jim. Very much appreciate it. All right.